is no doubt in my mind that Resident Evil is hands down my favorite video game franchise of all time. Just look at the content on my channel and that should be clear as day. With that being said, there are plenty of games out there with the Resident Evil IP attached to it that don't always feel like a game within the franchise. And while some of them are pretty god awful, there are a few that stand out from the crowd that I believe deserve a little attention. So on today's episode, I'm taking a look at some of the best Resident Evil spin-off games ever made. Before I get started, I do want to clarify what I'm considering a spin-off game, as I know this is going to come up in the comments. For this list, I'm looking at any games that are not numbered entries of the series, nor are they remakes of numbered entries. So for clarification, that means no Deadly Silence or official remakes, and no Resident Evil 0 through Resident Evil Village. Any game outside of the ones I just mentioned are completely fair game. Also, if you don't mind, help me out by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel if you enjoy my content. But with that out of the way, my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games, and this is my top 10 best Resident Evil spin-off games. Let's get it. Number 10, Dead Aim. One RE spin-off game that most fans of the series have never played is Dead Aim. This action-focused zombie game combines a lot of different elements that we have seen throughout the series. For example, you get that traditional third-person perspective, but with the twist of first-person combat. This means every time you aim your gun at a zombie, your character switches from third-person to first-person. This was a unique mechanic to Dead Aim, and while I wasn't the biggest fan of it, the game was still a lot of fun to play. The story wasn't the best in the franchise, but if you're looking for that secret agent type of setting with BOW straight out of Umbrella, then this game will probably be a fun time for you. Number 9, Operation Raccoon City. Capcom has taken multiple opportunities to cash in on a Resident Evil Online experience. Some were complete duds like Umbrella Corps, but on the flip side, they did deliver a few unique and fun multiplayer games. One such game is of course Operation Raccoon City. Now look, I know this game isn't perfect, and I have spent some time myself looking down on this game even in some of my other videos. The thing is though, when you look at some of the games that came after Operation Raccoon City, using a similar formula, then this game starts looking like a masterpiece in comparison. Operation Raccoon City was the franchise's first shot at a squad-based third-person shooter that pitted two teams against each other in PvP while also featuring a single-player campaign. The online multiplayer was kinda clunky and rough, but still a decent time to be had with friends. While there's nothing in this game that makes it incredible and it's probably average at best, the fact remains that when you think about some of the other spin-off titles out there, this one just doesn't seem so bad anymore. Number 8, The Mercenaries 3D. On paper, this game should have been an easy one for Capcom, as they took one of the franchise's most popular bonus games and made it into a full-blown 3DS game, but sadly, it failed to meet expectations. A big reason why some fans were pretty annoyed with this game came down to the lack of content for it despite the high price tag that Capcom charged for it, considering that in some other mainline games, the mode was free of charge. Still, if you ignore the price of the game and the amount of content that you got for it, the fact still remains that Mercenaries 3D was a lot of fun. Getting the opportunity to play online with a friend while killing an endless horde of monsters always kept me entertained, and I would argue that this was one of the best Mercenaries that we've ever seen in a Resident Evil game. If only Capcom put a little more work into this game and added a lot more content to keep players busy, then who knows? Maybe it could have started a very successful spin-off series. Instead, we're left with bonus modes in our mainline entries, which are at least free, so hey, win-win I guess. Number 7, Survivor. I can't defend this game enough. I know there are some fans out there that do not like this game at all, and I totally get it. But Resident Evil Survivor has a soft spot in my heart. Survivor was the franchise's first shot at a first-person like-gun game, as it followed Ark Thompson, a man who had amnesia after falling from a chopper. He eventually learns that he was sent to this island by none other than Leon S. Kennedy to retrieve some evidence against Umbrella. In my opinion, the story here is one of the best in a spin-off Resident Evil game, and the gameplay was a lot of fun despite it taking on a different style compared to the classic games of the franchise. One last thing that I want to say about this game is how killer the soundtrack was. I mean, listen to this. Number 6, Resident Evil: The Darkside Chronicles. With this entry, I feel like we start hitting the bigger spin-off games of the franchise, starting with The Darkside Chronicles. While the series was no stranger to on-rail shooters up until this point, I feel like this game and its predecessor were the two that really stood out as being the ones that truly knocked it out of the park in this style. A lot of the success comes from the improved graphics and visuals during the gameplay segments and the addition to the lore that the games brought. In Darkside's case, we see the inclusion of Operation Javier, which tells the events of a mission that both Leon and Krauser went on together. The game also retells the stories of Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica. The only reason why this one doesn't move up higher on this list comes down to two things. One, the transitioning of the game compared to its predecessor was a step down, as some players even got motion sickness while playing the game. The second reason is because of the major change it made to one character in particular, Alexia Ashford. She goes from a caring sister who's obsessed with her research to just a psychopath basically, who literally kills her own brother. Regardless, Darkside Chronicles is a fun spin-off title for fans of the mainline series that would love to see more lore details and retelling of their favorite games, but with a new perspective and gameplay. Number 5, Revelations 2. While not a numbered entry, hence why we find it on this list, Revelations 2 is one of 3 spin-off titles that are considered mainline entries and are canon to the Resident Evil universe. This game follows 2 returning characters, Claire and Barry, alongside 2 new characters, Moira and Natalia, with the first one being the daughter of Barry. On top of the protagonist, Revelations 2 also introduces a new villain, Alex Wesker, who is the sister of the infamous Albert Wesker. Revelations 2 is very similar to the second generation of Resident Evil games like 5 and 6, which all focus on the over-the-shoulder gameplay combined with a more action-focused approach, and that featured an optional co-op experience. Thankfully, Revelations 2 actually found more inspiration from horror compared to some of its predecessor, as it introduced some truly terrifying and disturbing monsters in the game, like the Remnants and even Alex Wesker's final form. Add that to the much anticipated return of Barry Burton, and an interesting premise on an isolated island, and you had a clear recipe for success. Sure, the episodic style with the mid-episode endings didn't really help with the pacing of the game, and the decision to prevent your partner from being able to use guns were both a step in the wrong direction, but the game still had a better atmospheric horror setting than some installments in the mainline series, and featured an interesting story with a killer cliffhanger ending.
A cage went in search of a bird, but now the bird is gone. The bird has changed.
Number 4, The Umbrella Chronicles. Taking a step backwards again, we once again revisit on-rail shooters. This time we look at The Umbrella Chronicles, which in my opinion is the best on-rail shooter in the series. What's unique about this spin-off compared to the rest of the ones on this list is that it's narrated by the most iconic villain of the series, Albert Wesker. Sure, just like Darkside Chronicles, the game retells different stories that we've already seen before, but in my opinion, it does it better than Darkside and even includes some additional scenarios that reveal some additional lore. For example, in Umbrella Chronicles, we see the game retell Resident Evil 0, the first game, and Nemesis. We also see new stories that include Wesker's reanimation after being killed in the Spencer Mansion, a scenario that shows us Rebecca and Richard in between the events of RE0 and RE1, and even a new mission that takes both Jill and Chris over to Russia to bring down Umbrella's last stronghold. While the transitions are not perfect here, we see it done better than Darkside Chronicles despite it being a predecessor of that game. The Umbrella Chronicles is easily the best on-rail shooter of the franchise, and it's one of my favorite spin-off Resident Evil games. Number 3, Revelations. As we break the top 3 on this list, we once again come across yet another spin-off game that was better than its sequel. Personally, I love both Revelation games, but my favorite of the two is the first one. But that being said, they are pretty close, hence why I have them only 2 spots apart from each other on this list. Still, when I compare them side by side, the pros in the first game outweigh the pros of the second game. While Revelations 2 definitely has the better story and more interesting new characters, Revelations stands out in other ways. For one, the returning characters. Nothing against Barry and Claire, but the two don't really scream iconic in terms of them meeting in the same game. especially since that doesn't even really happen until like the last few minutes of the game. Chris and Jill, on the other hand, just have that incredible chemistry, and even though they were separated from each other for the first half of the game, the reunion of them two in the second half of the game just felt right. Not to mention there's the boss fights in the first Revelation game, which I personally find more challenging and interesting, like the comms officer, aka the Skagdead. This boss fight had a brilliant lead up, and he was a very intense boss fight. The final boss fight, Ultima Abyss, remains as one of the hardest boss fights in the series. Sure, the new characters in the first Revelations game were kind of annoying and the story felt like a spy movie gone bad, but overall Revelations 1 felt more like a Resident Evil game than most spin-off games on this list. Number 2, Outbreak Files. Wow, just wow. Outbreak Files is easily the most underrated Resident Evil game. Because of this game being way before its time in a period that wasn't really popular for online multiplayer games, not many fans experienced this game back on the PlayStation 2. And because for whatever reason, Capcom still hasn't remastered or remade this game despite them trying out so many live service multiplayer games, most fans will never get the opportunity to play this diamond in the rough. But Capcom, if you're watching this right now, which you're probably not, let's be real, but if you are, then do something with this game. You've been looking for a way to dip your toes into the online multiplayer atmosphere with a Resident Evil IP, but here's the thing. You guys already have the perfect way to do it. Just look at the Outbreak Files. Sorry guys, rant over. Anyway, yes, Outbreak Files is number 2 on here, and if it wasn't for the number 1 entry technically not being a numbered entry in the series, then Outbreak would easily claim the number 1 spot. Outbreak Files combines 2 halves of the same game basically. Outbreak Files 1 and Files 2. Each file consists of 5 different scenarios, giving us a grand total of 10 scenarios within Raccoon City. The player can select from one of 8 different characters while also having 2 other characters join them on their team. Depending if you're online or not, the additional characters can be other players or AI controlled. Outbreak Files gives a unique perspective and look at the citizens of Raccoon City during the initial outbreak. From areas like zoos to sewers to hospitals, Outbreak Files fully explores Raccoon City more than we have ever seen before in a mainline game. The game plays with a unique mechanic called the infection. As characters come face to face with infected creatures, their infection rate grows, and if it ever reaches 100%, then that character will become a zombie and turn against their fellow allies, which actually is pretty fun. The game was truly far beyond its time and introduced some truly iconic locations, unique characters, and some creative enemies in the form of infected animals or premature lickers. And while I don't know if we'll ever get a remake of Resident Evil Outbreak, I do hope that Capcom remasters this collection and give us dedicated servers one day soon. That's the dream, guys. Number 1, Code Veronica. Probably the most controversial pick that I can choose to put on this list, Code Veronica in my eyes is the best Resident Evil spin-off game. First, I gotta address the elephant in the room. Code Veronica is hardly a spin-off game. Just like the Revelation games, Code Veronica is considered a mainline entry as it's completely canon in the universe of Resident Evil. Actually, it's more than that. Code Veronica provides way more information to the lore of Resident Evil games than a spin-off game should. With that being said, Code Veronica is not a numbered entry. So it makes it really hard to decide if I should consider it or not for this list, which is exactly why I made a rule that any games that are not numbered entries or remakes of numbered entries count as a spin-off, at least in terms of making this list. Anyway, while Code Veronica may not be a numbered entry, it finds itself including a lot more lore than most games in the series. Plus, it includes 2 main protagonists of previous games in the franchise, Chris and Claire Redfield. Add that to the reunion of Chris and Wesker, the only spin-off game to be done in that old school survival horror style, and that incredible soundtrack that rivals even Resident Evil 2 and 3 soundtracks, Code Veronica is easily one of my favorite games of the entire franchise. Let's not forget about the brilliant boss fights in the game, by the way, like the cargo plane fight, the rooftop fight, the final fight against Alexia. As for why Capcom would include so many iconic lore building moments in a non-numbered entry of the series, well, that's easy. It's because it was supposed to be a numbered entry. In fact, Code Veronica was intended to be Resident Evil 3. However, due to contract obligations with Sony, Capcom was forced to crank out one more entry on that original PlayStation, which is why we saw Resident Evil 3 Nemesis get made, and we saw them reuse a lot of the same assets as Resident Evil 2. It's because of this decision why so many fans missed out on Code Veronica, as they thought it was just a spin-off game that didn't matter. Still, true fans know the story behind why Code Veronica should be considered a numbered entry despite the missing number. And those same fans are the ones that are crying out for a remake for this incredible entry of the Resident Evil series. So Capcom, make it happen next, please. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think about my #1 pick. Do you agree with Code Veronica being the best spin-off Resident Evil game, or do you think another game deserves that title? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more ranking videos like this one, especially if you love Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and other survival horror content. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.